Hey there folks, the number one Earl Sweatshirt fan from the Infinite Jukebox here with another album review, and today I wanted to talk about the new Earl Sweatshirt record, Live, Laugh, Love. Few rappers have as deeply personal of a career trajectory as Earl Sweatshirt does, and that is something that he has worn on his sleeve from one record to the next since day one. That kind of emotional transparency has really frankly defined him as an artist. For example, 2010's Earl demonstrated a very misanthropic and horrorcore inspired MC that nonetheless seemingly had something more introspective bubbling beneath the surface. And with 2013's Doris, as well as 2015's I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside, and Solace EP, we began to see a bit of a revelation in the realm of Earl Sweatshirt. The revealing of emotional layers of Earl Sweatshirt the artist as he began to properly explore in earnest themes of suicide, anxiety, and depression with a uniquely deadpan delivery and style that immediately made him one of the most easily recognizable voices of his generation of alternative and underground rappers. And it seemed as though Earl was working out his grief, his suffering, his pain right before the eyes and ears of his audience. And in a sense, that arguably contributed to his popularity. Whether you take that as many people being able to relate to that pain or people enjoying his work from a nearly voyeuristic standpoint, it is nonetheless true that the complete and total honesty being delivered by Earl Sweatshirt from one record to the next is certainly what encouraged a lot of people to check out his music in the first place, and especially to keep up with him as the years went on and many of his peers kind of fell to the wayside to make way for a new wave, a new generation of underground and alternative rappers. And the improvement of his mental health and overall quality of life sort of started to become traceable with each new release from one year to the next as records became further apart and eventually, kind of stopped being so depressive. I mean, in 2025, Earl's music is no longer about the lowest of lows that a single man can suffer on a mental level. Rather, Live, Laugh, Love is an unfiltered celebration of a peaceful, successful life that has been well fought and has finally lent itself to some degree of serenity. And it's hard not to take a massive degree of joy out of listening to that. The songwriting throughout Live, Laugh, Love is undoubtedly personal, almost constantly over the course of its brief runtime, and it is in that regard that this record never fails to feel like Earl Sweatshirt's signature style, the kind of thing that people began to artistically subscribe to him for years ago, that complete and total earnesty. Because while this record may deal with different thematic and generally tonal kind of ideas than some of his previous work, his latest LP is still an album with the core goal of exploring the current point of his life and discussing how he feels in various regards. And that includes topics like reporting to his audience about his mental health and his own feelings towards a number of different topics, something that may admittedly seem repetitious to those who have been frequenting each new Earl Sweatshirt release for the last handful of years, but certainly not something that's unwelcome considering that is arguably a definitive aspect of Earl's entire style, sound, brand, if you will. And where Live, Laugh, Love really differentiates itself is in how it is a constantly celebratory and triumphant record. Now, some casual or otherwise just ignorant Earl fans may claim that the positivity demonstrated here on Live, Laugh, Love is some entirely newfound concept for Earl that he's never once delivered before on a record. It is, in fact, a tone that has consistently been rising in his music since the beginning of the decade. It's just simply not true to say that this record is the album where Earl suddenly stops being depressed. That is just, quite frankly, grossly incorrect. But it is undeniable that Live, Laugh, Love is Earl's most hopeful and reassured listening experience to date, so there arguably is a degree of truth to that aforementioned statement. because even with the classic sort of blink and you miss it runtimes of many of the songs here, each individual track explores one or more ideas related to thriving while also maturing and having things to actually look forward to in the future. You know, for example, you have the track Gamma, Need the Love, which features lines such as, I couldn't wait, couldn't shake the notion, my fate was up for me to decide, it's no time for pump and brakes, that clearly show how Earl's worldview has changed, as well as some kind of clarification on his own artistic ideology and the manner in which he's continually pushed forward as an artist, despite going through several times of immense mental turmoil, kind of determining his own fate, that self-determinism that permeates a large portion of his more recent work. It really does get enhanced here, maybe a little more properly explained by Earl himself, but just generally speaking, that kind of self-determination is really put into the spotlight here. This idea that he has control over himself and his own life in every single facet, or at least every single facet you would realistically expect someone to have control over, and that he's using that responsibility in his maturing age to create something positive for himself and the people around him. Elsewhere on the track Crisco, Earl seemingly reflects on his earlier days as an edgy and shock-reliant rapper, his days with Odd Future, and his very early solo work, where he says, I'm saying sorry for the pain I caused, God knows my heart, and that I'm out here trying to change the course, I'm working on it. Something that he perhaps has never really addressed so directly before. It's certainly something that he has brought up in the past, especially on his last couple of records, but maybe not so one-on-one. You know, Earl is the kind of rapper that can often layer things in symbolism and metaphor and the abstract, so to see him so earnestly reflect on that era of his life, apologize for it, and admit that he does have some regrets, but that he's doing everything he can to, you know, fix any burned bridges, to mend any strained relationships, it feels really special, and it feels like a degree of honesty that is just really refreshing coming from a rapper with a, you know, previously kind of notorious reputation and image, albeit a reputation that has certainly, you know, faded by this point. You also have the album closer Exhaust, which continues some of that same bittersweet kind of energy as he reminisces on older times and growing older with lyrics like, we went our own ways, I still think of you highly, give my baby my daddy's last name and his likeness. And, you know, going into any Earl Sweatshirt album basically guarantees that any potential listener will be greeted by some degree of introspection, and in turn, you'll probably get quite the emotional gut punch. I mean, hell, the aforementioned Exhaust made me cry the first time that I listened to it. A few tears were genuinely shed. But that's the thing. Live, Laugh, Love presents that soul-searching that you expect from Earl Sweatshirt in an entirely new light, because this is a record that bathes in a newfound kind of sincerity that feels in line with his previous work, all of which was still undeniably sincere, but it manages to demonstrate a new hue in his emotional palette, if you will. It's a record that is sincere just as anything else he's ever done is, yet at the same time is sincere in its description of optimism, something that we've never really seen exactly from Earl in the past do. Otherwise, the short runtime may be off-putting to some, but a brief record is nothing foreign to Earl Sweatshirt by this point, and if you are staying tapped into new Earl Sweatshirt albums and you are getting filtered by short songs and a short album length, then I don't know what to tell you, man. He's been like this for a long-ass time, and he's probably going to continue to be like that if he chooses to release projects in the future. Every song is exactly what it needs to be, no over-the-top embellishments or missing passages to be found, and Live, Laugh, Love is really the kind of album that proves that Earl is, in a way, the king of restraint and precision, you know, the kind of rapper that knows exactly what he wants to be and executes it within those exact parameters, never going below or beyond the call. And even with most of the tracks here not cracking even 3 minutes, Earl Earl is still capable of delivering complex yet open-hearted songwriting without any fear of emotional intimacy, while also knowing how to reject any possible temptations of self-indulgence that could surely arise in creating an album that's as positive and in many regards actually as admirable as this record is in kind of showcasing the brighter side of life. Meanwhile, the beats throughout the record are absolutely outstanding. Tourmaline's simple yet punchy percussion casually kind of snaps along in the listener's face over a relatively mellow beat, making this really engaging track instrumentally, while Crisco, which I mentioned before in discussing the lyrics, features this warbling choir that I really love as it enhances some of the pre-existing semi-psychedelic influences that have kind of been in Earl's music for many, many years and several album release cycles by this point. Again, these beats succeed because they never overreach in any way structurally or sonically, and although countless artists would surely be tempted to create grand, sprawling tracks that celebrate life like they do on this record, Earl's production work alongside people like Navy Blue, Child Actor, and Black Noise is self-contained and extremely well-groomed, and the final result is a record that, from a sonic standpoint, is executed virtually perfectly. I mean, sure, it is similar to certain other Earl albums in that it does leave you wanting more, but with an album that's as positive, as genuine, and as definitive in terms of the statement that it's making as Live, Laugh, Love, it's also kind of hard to ask for more. You may want it, but you also deep down know that you don't really need it or even really deserve it, considering this is what Earl put forth, and you aren't necessarily the person to ask for more. Earl Sweatshirt is still bound to be a polarizing rapper with his deadpan flows, extremely vulnerable lyrics, and complete and total rejection of traditional hooks. It just becomes increasingly apparent with each passing year that he is seemingly destined to become a true alternative or underground rap fan's favorite rapper. I'm not acting like Earl Sweatshirt is some obscure guy that only the biggest of the dorks know. That's obviously not the case, but it is just increasingly obvious that this is a man that is never reaching mainstream status, and it certainly doesn't want to either, because even if he does have a somewhat narrow appeal compared to some of the same artists that he came up with, and certainly never facing the same commercial success as Tyler, the Creator, or Frank Ocean, few are capable of wearing their hearts on their sleeve at the same level that Earl fucking Sweatshirt is. Because while it is unquestionable that we will probably at least hear from him again in the semi-near future, Live, Laugh, Love is a great record to end things on for the time being at least. The man who gained notoriety for bringing some of the most brutally honest depression raps ever written finally finds himself stable, content, and looking towards the future with a gleam of genuine optimism in his voice and in his lyrics. And I can't help but find myself loving to hear that, to experience that. It feels like a true gift that I'm genuinely thankful for Earl putting out into the world. It's a record that has a lot of positive vibes to it that also feels like a genuine reflection of him in this exact moment in his life. It's really beautiful to see, and I'm really excited to see what comes next with this sort of new direction that he's going in. I'm going to give this record 4 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that is the end of this album review. Thank you for watching the Infinite Jukebox, and I'll see you in the next one.